Good evening, everyone. It's really nice to see you. Sister Maria might be a bit late today, so I think we'll jump right in. But just a normal thanks to everyone for taking the time this evening to chat a bit about some, in this case, challenging but inspiring Buddhist ideas. And or if you're watching online on YouTube through the YouTube channel. In any event, I appreciate your patience with the presentation, and I hope some of it you find stimulating and worth coming back to. And thanks, of course, to Spirit Alive for putting these programs together, not just this one, but all of the great programs. But it's a nice honor to be a part of this community. And to Matthew for running the show, as always. So I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to dive right in. Again, I'm not kidding when I say that there's good news or happy news this week. We're going to be exploring easily one of the most optimistic and influential, but also controversial ideas within Buddhism, at least as Buddhism has flourished in East Asia and in the Himalayan regions. And this is the concept of Buddha nature. So we'll talk a lot about what this means, and then the benefits of this concept, and then the trouble it's going to get us into in the coming weeks. So there's both a little bit of um, kind of philosophical complexity. I think we can make our way through it pretty clearly in this presentation, recognizing there's a lot of complexity hiding behind the scenes. And yet, the basic message of Buddha nature that we'll see is tremendously positive and inspiring. And that makes it fun to talk about. So we're going to look at some of the slides, and I see a question about outlining. If it's helpful, I will see if we can upload the slide presentations, which appear, of course, in the videos, to the links on YouTube. We'll have to find a place to put them to link them, to which we can link them, but that might be helpful actually. So at least we can have some of the terminology and certainly a number of the references that I will make today, as well as in future programs, um, uh, will end up on the YouTube channel. So even last week's, I haven't uploaded all of the links yet, but I'm going to send them over to Matthew, who's so helpful in that regard. The point being that hopefully by the end of this course, should you ever want to return to this material, not only can you watch and listen in, but also find some places to go for additional information or to go look at some of the images or otherwise. So again, thank you for the question. All right, so let's dive right in here. With a bit of review as always, though of course the review we move quickly through. So relevant ideas from even our fall sessions here today have to do with presentations about self. So one thing we've mentioned a number of times is the recognition from very early on in Buddhist tradition on earth, as captured in sermons attributed to the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, some of which are in theory as old as 2,500 years old. Though, of course, according to the tradition, these ideas are much older than that. In these early sermons, one of the causes of suffering, really the root cause of suffering, is ignorance, a misunderstanding of the nature of the world. And that ignorance is primarily about what it means to have a self. And we make mistakes in that we not only assume, really, at every moment of our lives that we are lasting. At least there's some aspect of us that's not changing, that is kind of bears the experience that we have at every moment, and yet that itself is somehow consistent or constant. So this lasting nature of the self, we think that there's only one of us in a sense, that there must be some singular piece that's us. And the big one here is that our self is independent. I'm different from not only the other people around me, but all of my experiences, my sensory stimuli, the ideas that course through my head, and so on and so forth. So this just is an obvious instinct. Even getting too philosophical about it, though of course the texts do, kind of overstates the obviousness of this instinct. We all just feel like we are our own people. We're separate from the world around us. And this is only a small problem in that it causes every single moment of our suffering is this mistake. That's the pitch. So one of the things we're going to be thinking about today is how approaches to teaching the problem of self change as the tradition expands. So again, we've said that one of the issues critiqued in early tradition is our assumption of independence. By the way, independence is connected to our ability to at least control something in the world and separate ourselves. Whereas, of course, unfortunately, this leads to suffering. That's the old pitch. So we've seen this now a number of times, right? Attachment to the self, conception of ourself as that thing that we can control that's independent doesn't work out. And in fact, it leads us to judge all the things around us in terms of this consistent self, which never exists in the first place. And so the whole project is a losing battle, whether we're aware of it or not, by the way. Okay. Then what we did was last time we introduced a broad kind of umbrella, literally a canopy, which was a reference we made last week. A broad kind of umbrella vision that emerges historically, historians would say, as early as maybe the first century before the Common Era. Some of the oldest textual versions of this vision certainly were very confident historically by the end of the first century of the Common Era. You have Buddhist texts, which means communities of people proposing a grand vision, literally a great vision. That's what the Maha is, the great part, and the Yana is the vehicle. So the vision is a great vehicle. It's a universal vehicle. It's a vehicle for everyone to get onto. It's like a big bus or a chariot, right? That is going to take all beings to liberation. Okay. So this vision, as we're going to get to in a minute, is also going to transform how we think about the problem of self. First of all, the problem of releasing oneself from the suffering, detaching oneself, seeing through the mistakes that we make about self is no longer just a personal project. In some sense, it never was, because you always need help on the path, of course. But in a way, you could argue that, and certainly these Mahayana texts do argue that, earlier iterations of this path to liberation, this gradual path to liberation that we talked about a lot in the fall, is centered on each individual's capacity to break down their mistaken sense of identity, ironically, and then no longer suffer. But that's not going to fly anymore in this new vision because everyone's got to come along for the ride in order for the project to succeed. That's how the Mahayana claims itself to operate. This is not an external argument about the Mahayana. This is quite explicit in uh, Mahayana sutras or sermons attributed to the historical Buddha that talk about this new great vision. And something that's going to be a really big deal in the coming weeks is the recognition of the necessity for skillfulness. You see this on the slide. So if everyone's coming along, then Buddhist teachers and even those awakened beings or those aspiring to awake have to find a way to reach people where they're at. It's not sufficient to just lecture at them like on Zoom. That's not going to do very well. Or just read through slides. That's not going to get us very far. But rather, there's a necessity to recognize the particular understanding, needs, and for those who remember some of the discussion of karma last fall, the different karmic background of even everyone on the Zoom, let alone our pets, let alone being stuck in hell. What's the idea? Because we've all had different past experiences, we see the world differently because of cause and effect, right? Those past experiences lead us to see, judge, understand the world differently, which means these past experiences are going to lead us to see, view, judge the world of Buddhist teachings differently. So therefore, there's a certain amount of skillful flexibility that's necessary in a presentation of the teachings. So hold this thought is going to be crucial. We introduced this last week. So one way of thinking about this problem is the recognition in Buddhist communities that there can't just be a singular way to teach no self, primarily because people freak out. And if you're one of those people freaking out, congratulations, I joined the club, which is to say, right, and not to pick on Sister Maria, but she was kind enough to offer some concerns in a few of our sessions. The idea of not having some lasting self to center our experience is really troubling. It's kind of existentially troubling. It feels scary, but also there's a danger of something like a nihilistic interpretation. Well, if I don't really exist, everything is just changing. Who cares, right? Anything goes. It's like the famous Tolstoy, excuse me, this famous Dostoevsky passage, right? This kind of concern that without a set world, moral rules that appeal to each lasting human being, we're going to be in trouble. So this is a big problem for us in the coming weeks. The anxiety about a world where there's loss of self. Aha. So we have two responses to this problem that we have to share to understand the actual paths to liberation that we're going to explore in our last couple sessions, which is to say, if this second half of the class, spring session, is about the quick paths to liberation, in some case, even considered to be the instantaneous paths, then we're going to have to understand at least two concepts. The first is this week, the idea of Buddha nature, which to simplify is a response to the anxiety that people have that they don't exist, which itself is not exactly what no self claims. Existence and experience does happen. It's just that there isn't some coherent through line that always lasts. This is still quite scary. So one of the responses we have that we might argue is a skillful response to the needs of audience members is to talk about this kind of essential heart aspect of our experience that we're going to call Buddha nature. So in a way, it's an affirmation of the very experience that you're having at every moment. And I don't want to say it's an affirmation of you, because that would be going too far. Because many of the ideas, thoughts, emotions, judgments we attribute to ourselves, from our name and our social security number to our sexual identity to our religious identity, to all of these other things are themselves constantly in flux. That would be the argument. But there is some kernel of essential experience that's undeniable. You know, because right at the moment, there's experience. Someone must be having experience, you're probably saying. Someone's listening to me jabber on and thinking about either whatever I'm talking about or whatever you have to do tomorrow morning, whatever else, right? I mean, someone's doing those things, right? Someone's paying for the electricity so that the laptop works. So, in any event, there's a certain affirmation of that. We're going to call that Buddha nature. What is it? Tricky. You can already see why this might be controversial within Buddhist communities. Okay, so we're going to get the affirmation. That's Buddha nature. Again, a skillful approach. Perhaps, we don't know, of course, but perhaps in response to the anxiety about nihilism, once we deny the self, everyone gets nervous. No problem. Let's reaffirm that there's an experience. We're going to call it Buddha nature. See? The second piece is the opposite, which is emptiness. Emptiness is a criticism of not only the coherence of the self, but of all the things that the self judges, which basically means everything out there in the world. That's next week. A radical critique of selfhood at large, not just the self of me and you, but the self of our water glass, a ring, the computer itself, all sorts of things. So we're going to come to that. But what a thing I'm just mentioning here at the beginning, coherently or not, I don't know, is the flexibility in some of these Mahayana teachings. The recognition that one needs to come from different perspectives for different audiences at the same problem. Okay. And hopefully we'll gain at least a little bit of confidence today and next week in some of these ideas so that we can get to where the action is, which are the actual theories of how to apply these skillful teachings to something like liberation. So that's a promise if you stick with me. All right. So in any event, Buddha nature. This is good news, so we can all take a deep breath. All right. So what is Buddha nature? In the simplest terms, Buddha nature is a teaching that appears in a set of Mahayana sutras that affirms that everybody can be liberated. It's really affirmative in a universal sense. There were debates that we see in Buddhist texts, philosophical texts as well, and commentaries about whether or not everyone can be liberated. So one problem would be, Sesh, well, some people, because of their karmic background, are set up to be liberated in this way. Other people are set to be liberated in this way because they are more responsive to certain kind of teachings, which suggests that maybe some people are never going to make it. They're hopeless. You see the problem? So this position in the Mahayana is universally rejected. So Buddha nature is one way of saying, no, 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 all beings, me, you, everyone you know, the folks you like, the folks you can't stand, but also animals being stuck in hell, right? Beings, hungry ghosts, even gods, and there's a whole panoply of gods in the Indian system. They all have the capacity to be liberated. So that's kind of a nice universal statement, right? In tune with the Mahayana. Everyone can be liberated. Now, it's going to take a while, but it's possible. So then the question is, well, what is that potential exactly? Like, well, how do we know? Maybe the causes and conditions just are such that, like, Some things work, some things don't work, right? I mean, you could plant, we're going to talk about seeds a lot, but like you could plant toothpicks, paper clips, right? Eyeglasses in the ground, and they are never going to bloom to become, a cherry tree. You need the right kind of material to begin with, is that right? So the question is, what on earth would be the material that has the capacity universally to bloom into awakening? And whatever that is, it must be something that everyone on the Zoom here has, and everyone in our families have, and everyone across the world has, and all the goldfish and the ants and everyone, all the beings, because that's the claim they're going to get liberated, you see? So this is kind of the problematic. It's this universal claim, and then the theorization of the problematic of how to figure out what gets worked on. The problem is if we call that the self, we're in trouble because Buddhist communities are already committed to the fact that that doesn't exist. And if I say, well, there's a special part of you, right? Every one of you, Jenny, Caroline, Christine, Joan, right? Eileen, all of you all have a special part of you that's going to get liberated or has the potential to get liberated. What's everyone on the Zoom going to say? At least as you play along here, you're going to say, fantastic, I knew it. That's myself. Be like, Josh, I've been telling you the whole time. That's my soul. That's my lasting true self. And to which these Mahayana Buddhists are going to say, whoa, no, wait a minute. Now you're getting attached to your Buddha nature, and therefore you're going to suffer. Do you see the trouble that we're in here? By the way, this trouble doesn't run out. For example, in the Tibetan tradition, which I'm most familiar with, they're still fighting about how to interpret this 2,000 years later. I'm going to prove it to you in a minute. Okay, so what's the problematic? The problematic is figuring out what this source of liberation really is. And one common metaphor I've already introduced is like a seed, right? If you have a seed, it eventually can grow into a tree. So there's an affirmation that we have the quality of Buddha inside of us. By the way, Buddha, which you see up at the top, Buddha nature, just means awakening. So we have this quality for the potential of liberation somehow in the heart of our experience, right? But the problem is, right, if you stick a seed on the table, remember we already talked about how our paper clip isn't going to get there, our eyeglasses aren't going to get there. I forget what my other dumb examples were, right? They're not going to get there. But even let's say you have a seed, let's say you have a cherry seed. Yeah, you're eating cherries. I don't know if it's the season, but let's say you get some cherries, right? While you're on the Zoom and you stick them on the table. If we come back 3 weeks later for our last of our 5 sessions, are we gonna have a cherry tree if you just leave it on the table? No. So you say, hey, all right, Professor Shapiro, I get the drill. Like, all right, we got to be a little more patient. Let's plant the seed on our table, on our desk. We'll come back in 25 years. Then maybe we'll have a tree. To which you say to me, no, are you an idiot? You need other conditions to make cherry trees or apple trees or orange trees or whatever, right? A seed is not enough. Okay, we get the drill. So what do you need? Well, you need water and sunshine and nutrients in the soil. And then all the proper conditions being there, you get a tree. See the metaphor? Pretty straightforward, right? So what's the idea? But in nature, it's like the seed. It's that thing which gets nourished through the contributing conditions. Conditions of morality, which is good karma, which is often generated with following moral vows, of which there are many, many, many in Buddhist monastic communities. Learning, study, interpretation of, for example, our attachment to self and otherwise, and meditation practice, which we talked about a little bit in this fall. The point is, you need the right conditions for the flourishing. And if the right conditions are present for any given being, anyone on the Zoom, me, you, no matter what your religious commitments are, your political commitments, at some point, given the nourishment of basically Buddhist practice, that's the short story, you're going to have the possibility of liberation. For who? For everybody. Makes sense. The story is pretty clear. We're going to have some problems. All right. But first, let's dig into this metaphor a little bit further, right? Here you have the kind of silly image I brought, right, of the seeds. The seed's not enough, but if you get the water and the sunshine, nice soil, you get your tree. This is our liberation. Okay. So to share here one example from an influential early text that talks about Buddha nature, right? We're going to see the metaphor of a sprout hidden inside a peel of fruit. So I'll just show you so you realize I'm not making it up. But also it's fun to look at some of these old texts a little bit for a couple different reasons. Okay, so this is a website I'll send a link to. See, all about Buddha nature. Atsadra Foundation is a contemporary Foundation, kind of a collection of Tibetan Buddhist translators that are working together to publish a lot of Tibetan Buddhist materials. And they have this whole wonderful website, which is like infinitely deep with material on the question of Buddha nature. Why do I just mention that before we look at a couple of moments? Because this is evidence that 2,000 years later, there is still active debate and concern in Tibetan Buddhist communities about how to interpret Buddha nature. And even if you don't understand a lot of the references, because you're relatively new to this material, if you spend 5 minutes on this website digging around, you will see that not everybody agrees at all. And it's 2,000 years later. I mean, Buddhism didn't make it to Tibet till probably around 600, 700, but still, that's a lot of years of debate. Is that clear? So Buddha nature is both a wonderfully affirming acknowledgement of our universal capacity to get liberated and within Buddhist communities, big trouble. By trouble, I just mean it's the kind of things people argue about. Fair enough? Okay, but let's look because the metaphors are really quite fun. Okay, so we are looking now. I know this is probably pretty small to read here on the screen. No big deal. You can follow the link if you like, but this is a reference to similes that appear in the Tathagata Garbha Sutra. The sutra is really a sermon or a discourse attributed usually to the historical Buddha, and Tathagata Garbha is one of the fancy terms that explains the idea of what we call Buddha nature. All right, and we're not going to get into the metaphor. It itself is a whole nother complex metaphor. Okay, but you'll see there's this very important passage here within the sutra that says, this Buddha nature abides within the shroud of afflictions. So within the cover of our basically negative habits, like attachment to the self, that leads to desire, craving, attachment, thirst, anger, aversion, also jealousy, pride, and all this negative stuff. So kind of covered by our negative habits is this Buddha nature. How should we understand that? Wonderful, we have metaphors or similes, right? Buddha nature is just like a Buddha in a decaying lotus, honey amidst bees, a grain in the husk, gold and filth, a treasure underground, and this is the one we're going to look at, a shoot and so on sprouting from a little fruit. Okay, but even before we look at the metaphor, you can see that all of these different images are a little bit functioning differently. So we haven't interpreted them yet. But it shouldn't be surprising that there's 2,000 years of debate about what Buddha nature is, because even in the very earliest materials, the textual sources are really ambiguous. Now they're profound. You could say, hey, professor, I've been listening. And the whole idea is skillful means. So of course we have to use different images to capture people and capture people's understanding and inspire them to practice, you see? No problem. But if your job is to interpret exactly what Buddha nature is, which many Buddhist scholars, I don't mean like academics at Fordham, I mean like real committed Buddhists historically who studied what the Buddha said, then you got real trouble here, right? Because these metaphors don't all work the same. And if you don't believe me, please stay tuned. We're going to play this game for the next 10 minutes or so. Fair enough? All right, so let's dig in with the kind of seed growing into a tree style metaphor, okay? Which is here. Okay, let me see if I got you the wrong one. Oh yeah, we're going to do two of them here. The Buddha essence resembles a kernel of grain in its husk. The husk obscures the grain. Because you might be saying, hey, it's nice to see that there's potential for liberation in me, but I don't feel it at all. Like I feel grumpy and sometimes really excited. Then I get a headache. I'm tired, right? I'm suffering. I'm very worried about the news for obvious reasons, right? I don't feel liberated. It doesn't feel like there's liberation in me at all. So you say, of course not. Because for the grain, that's your Buddha nature, your liberatory capacity to become edible, for it to be functioning, you got to get rid of all these problems. And the problems are the ignorance, meaning our habits of mind that aren't right, right? So we got to remove the habits of mind and then we can see what's really inside. It's kind of a beautiful metaphor, right? All right. So what do we do with this? What kind of a thing is hiding inside? What does it mean that there's this edible food, like a kind of like a grain that could become wheat, right? Inside of the husk? Well, let's see. What if we think about it like a sprout? Beans have tiny sprouts inside, but we cannot see them until the fruit and its peel have been shed. By the way, this extra detail we have here are commentaries by the Dalai Lama and a contemporary nun named Thupten Chodron from a book. You can see the reference when you follow. I don't want to get into all of the background there. But these are kind of contemporary interpretations based on very, very old source materials explaining what these mean. All right, so beans have tiny sprouts inside, but we cannot see them until the fruit and its peel have been shed. Similarly, for the path of seeing, which is the way of actually recognizing what we really are, to be actualized, you got to get rid of the problems. Again, the problems are going to be our habits of mind that were mistaken, our tendency to judge, desire, crave, or push away, become angry, and otherwise. Okay, and this is where the action is for us. The transforming Buddha essence, this is the Buddha nature, this is our potential, is like a sprout that has the potential to grow into a huge tree. Ah, just like the silly picture I showed, right? That will offer shade for many people on a hot day. So, of course, you get the Mahayana ideal here. Achieving the maturity of your potential to awake isn't just a selfish endeavor, it's what allows you to more skillfully help others, just like a tree doesn't just grow for its own sense of, I don't know, self-fulfillment that every tree wants to be the tallest tree. It's more like that Giving Tree, that beautiful book, the Shel Silverstein book, right? The tree grows so that it can offer its resources to others as in shade, right? Okay, but this is the important part. Just as the sprout needs good conditions to grow, we rely on the conditions of the collections of merit. That means good karmic behavior, being moral beings, making making decisions that are driven by positive intentions to help other beings, something like that. Okay, you need those conditions. That would be like maybe sunshine and rain, and you also need some wisdom. That would be the learning and the meditating. Okay. So this metaphor of the seed is both accessible. It makes a lot of sense, I hope, even in kind of my problematic presentation, I'm sure. It's not that complicated, right? And inspiring if we all have this capacity, if we can see through our worst moments and habits and tendencies, then maybe we can access that kind of beautiful capacity inside each and every one of us, right? To grow, to become more awake, not only for our own good, but for all beings. Good news? Okay, be careful. Don't, no smiling here on the Zoom. Why? We have to talk about it. Okay. Problems. If you're telling me that liberation, awakening is dependent on conditions, just like the tree is dependent on all these different steps over here, that means you're admitting that liberation itself must change. Why? Well, one of the philosophical insights you find in much Buddhist writing is that anything that comes from causes and conditions, meaning anything that's created from different parts contributing to it, must fall apart. And the tree is an obvious example. If a tree is dependent on seeds, but also sunshine and rain and the nourishment of the soil to grow, that means it is possible, and it's not even possible, it's necessary in time, eventually, that some of those conditions will cease to be present. You get a drought or climate change now, or there's toxins in the soil, or there's overgrowth of the forest so that this tree can't get access to the sun anymore, or the various nutrients that are kind of spread throughout the root system, right? Start to decay or fall away or whatever happens, right? And in fact, everyone knows it's very reasonable for a tree to die eventually. This is a tragic problem for the Buddhist theorists. Liberation, awakening cannot be impermanent, and be awakening. This is a basic principle in the earliest Buddhist sermons, but also makes a ton of sense. What is the point of striving to overcome the conditions of change, dependence, and suffering if eventually it's just going to fall apart again, right? You might as well eat, drink, and be merry, right? I mean, maybe you get a couple good lifetimes out of it, but look, there's already a conception of worlds of gods that live these really long, wonderful lives. Eventually, they get upset and suffer too, right? So, how can we claim, as a Buddhist tradition, that awakening is worth all of the effort to arrange the conditions properly if it's just going to be temporary? Okay, nobody thinks this is the case within Buddhist tradition, right? In a way, there aren't kind of like dogmatic principles you have to agree to. There's no credo exactly in Buddhist communities. That's not exactly how they function. But theoretically, almost like theologically, this is ground zero for Buddhists, or at least theorists of the path. You can't have impermanent liberation. The whole project falls apart. See the challenge here? So now folks have to figure out what to do with this Buddha nature challenge. Even, by the way, in the earlier traditions before the Mahayana vision, there are kind of interesting strategies for explaining why the ending of desire, craving, and attachment to a self, the ceasing is what it's called, the absence of attachment to self, itself leads to something that's an unchanging state. Even early on, they have to explain nirvana or a nibbana or a blowing out or an ending of suffering that's permanent. Okay. But now in this Mahayana tradition, especially with this introduction of Buddha nature, they got a big problem. So there are many different interpretations. You want to see some? You can follow the link to that website I just showed you. But we're going to talk about one in a minute. Because in the tradition, even in the text that introduced this wonderful, universal, affirming idea of Buddha nature, they recognize this problem. So you get different kinds of metaphors. So we ready for another round? We seeing the problem here? We can't have impermanent liberation. We're in trouble. Okay, so let's try a different image. Maybe this one will be better. Aha. How about Buddha nature that's like gold buried in filth, right, on the side of the road? Oh, that's provocative. All right, so let's see what this looks like. Okay, the Buddha essence resembles gold buried in filth. If someone doesn't mind nodding, you guys can see this properly? Shared? Yeah, okay, great. Okay. Hey, if someone accidentally drops some gold in a pile of filthy refuse, we have a lot of this in New York, right? In a pile of filthy refuse at the side of the road, we don't even know it's there, let alone think to take it out, clean it, and use it, right? I mean, you look around, you see garbage. Where I live down, and I don't want to offend anyone here, but I live in Lower Manhattan near the seaport, and I live on Fulton Street, which is a very dirty street. I mean, really, it's profoundly dirty. It's gross, frankly. That's not a Buddhist position. That's just Josh's position. But anyway, the point is, I'm never going up and down Fulton Street. By the way, Lower Manhattan, there's a lot of wealth here. We actually, ironically, sorry to get sidetracked, have literally one of the world's greatest collections of gold down the street at the Fed. But that's another conversation. But nobody goes up and down Fulton Street looking for gold. Is that clear? Nobody does that because it's just garbage all over the place, right? Okay. But what if we told you it's hiding there? What's the filth? Well, I'll tell you, right? Let me move this so I can see. Similarly, when our gold-like Buddha essence, that's the gold here, is your capacity to be liberated, is not mixed with defilements, the filth of the manifest course three poisons prevents us from seeing it. Okay, what does this mean in English, right? This means that when you are in the habit of attachment to self, and being engendering desire for good things. By the way, again, desire for good things does not mean like we're hedonists here. It's just the normal conception we have that certain causes and conditions are good and others are bad. When we're in this habit, and so we want good things and we get mad when we don't have them, and we want to get rid of bad things, right? And we get upset when they're present, even if they're, like humanitarian crises, right? We are going to be suffering. And when that's happening, we can't recognize that already potential of liberation that's inside of us. We just can't see it. It's the filth. These judgments we make about ourselves and everything around us are the garbage up and down my street that's covering the gold. See how the metaphor goes? Okay. So this is the explanation, just like we had the explanation before that there's kind of wheat, let's say, inside a husk. Why can't we see it, Josh? Because it's covered by our negative mental habits, right? Okay. Why can't we see the kind of the sprout inside the fruit? Because it's covered by the peel. So we don't even know to plant it, right? Just like our essence is covered by our negative habits. See this part? So this is now the gold that's covered by garbage. Okay. But this is the important next step. Oops. The gold is pure. It can never be impure, but we can't see it as long as it's sunk in the filth. Okay. What's different here? Do you need to plant gold in the ground and water it for it to be gold? Do you need to go out to like Home Depot and get a bunch of chemical products, right, to allow the gold to become gold? This isn't alchemy. If the gold is buried in, excuse my language, a pile of you know what on the street, then what you got to do is clean off the you know what. The gold has been fine the whole time. Like we can relax here. The gold is perfect. In fact, no amount of garbage piled on top of gold is going to change the gold from being gold. Is it clear how this is a slightly different metaphor than the seed? Right? If it was the seed, we'd have to take the piece of gold, stick it in the backyard, and do the planting. We don't need that because the gold on its own is perfectly pure. It's shining. It's as valuable as it ever will be. It's just that we don't see it, which is
Joshua,
just, yeah, please.
okay, so how I understand the difference, but I just want to get clarification. So, because one depends on conditions to bring it to perfection, one is perfect, not relying on any conditions at all. It waits to be discovered in its
Yes,
perfection. The other one waits to grow into perfection. So if the conditions are there, this can grow into perfection. In the other case, if you do the discovery, you get to see the perfection. Is that right?
wonderful, Sister Marie, that's perfect. So I just put this into the chat. This is my vocabulary today, but I didn't invent these ideas, right? Of the difference between, let's say, nourishment in the first model. This is exactly, Sister Marie, you got it perfectly, not surprisingly, and discovery in the second model. It's really a different model. So in a way, the discovery itself, you can interpret as a condition. This is going to be trouble for us. We're going to fight about this for 3 weeks, right? But the model is very different. Nourishment, growing something versus discovering it that's already perfect is totally different. So already at the very beginning, we're going to dig into this in a minute. From the very, literally, the very beginning of the tradition you see in India, if we're thinking historically about this, there's this idea that maybe our Buddha nature is already perfect within us. It's
Well,
just we don't see it. Aha. So let's dig into this idea, which, by the way, doesn't always win the day. There are different communities that emphasize the nourishment aspect or the discovery piece or both at different times, which, by the way, within the tradition of the Mahayana, you could argue makes sense because of why? Skillfulness, you see? Skillfulness. Some of us need a nourishment metaphor, some of us need a discovery metaphor. And who's kidding who? Buddhists are human beings. So trust me, they really argue about this a lot. All right. So where are we? One version of a solution to the we can't have a changing enlightenment problem, we can't have a changing liberation problem, is called original enlightenment. It's based already on this earliest tradition where we saw the gold metaphor. Is that clear? And then other Indian texts, some of which some scholars claim were composed in China. But this idea that we often in English call original enlightenment, that we find in definitely seeds of it, ironically, or kind of kernels of this idea in Indian texts. And for certain, we have them full blown in Chinese, Korean, Japanese texts, and Vietnamese texts. right? We're going to call it enlightenment. Most famously, probably in the United States, is developed in medieval Japan, so around the 12th century on, called Hongaku. Or what is this interpretation of what Buddha nature is, similar to the gold metaphor? Well, it's the claim that actually, right now, every one of us, whether we're paying attention or not, is perfectly awake. It must be the case. Why must it be the case? Because we know two things for certain from this perspective. One, everyone has the potential to be liberated. The Buddha told us he wouldn't lie, right? Everyone has the potential to be liberated. And liberation is not something you can make, because if you make it, it's going to fall apart. We all know this in our lives, by the way. Anything that we're proud that we've created comes apart. I mean, sometimes lasts longer than others, but it's inevitable. So if both of these things are true, we all have the capacity to be liberated, and liberation can't change. It must be that every one of us has access, at the very least, to perfect awakening, which means the Buddha nature, which a minute ago we were talking about as potential for all beings, is actually the perfectly shining, glorious, pure awakening of the Buddha. There is no difference between you, Kimberly, Attilia, Linda, Betty, right, Sister Maria, Carol, than the Buddha. We just don't realize it. So the discovery model is actually not even an act of discovery as much as a getting out of the way. So we got to dig into this. But I hope you can realize in the maybe overly dramatic presentation I'm trying to create what a revolution this idea is in the history of Buddhist communities. It totally spins the idea of what a path to liberation even is, because there's nowhere to go. You're traveling back to where you are right now. All right, some big challenges await. Any mini questions here before we dig into the challenges? We're not kidding, by the way. Original alignment. Awakening is literally right here at the moment. We're just too all ignorant to see it. Sister Maria, please.
So, okay, so it's all there, and we have to get out of the way. And when we get out of the way, we find it, right?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, but when you get out of the way, you're not really the one finding anymore.
Okay, so,
But
all right.
yes, but you're correct.
All right. So you get out of the way, and what you find. Okay, so are you saying, though, and I hate to use this word because you said doesn't exist, but are you finding your true self? Is that what you're finding when you get out of the
Okay,
way?
so sometimes in the skillfulness of the Mahayana, people talk about this as your true self. But usually that's criticized because it lends us to get the wrong idea.
Okay.
Because again, there's many iterations of this problem. We'll try to touch on a couple of them in the coming weeks, including today, by the way. But the very idea that you're accessing the true self is going to almost inevitably lead to attachment.
Hmm.
Not to mention pride that you're the one who found it. Because if you think that you found your true self, that's not Buddha nature. That's just judgment, attachment. It's totally mistaken, right? You think it's gold, but it's just like you're piling more crap onto the gold. You see,
Hmm.
this becomes a real big issue. So let me add a metaphor to help us think about it. And then please, like, jot down your questions as it comes, because I'm sure that you guys all have great questions here. Okay. So in, for example, East Asia and Japan, where you get this model of original enlightenment. By the way, you have versions of it in Tibet too, but it's debated. Um, in this version, you will often see the comparison of that awakened nature that you have right now. You just can't see it because you don't realize it as the sun behind the clouds. In Japan, if you know anything about Japanese poetry and art, they often talk about like the beautiful full moon hidden behind clouds. It's the same metaphor. Okay. Why? Now, if you'll bear with me a little bit for some undergraduate style teaching, but I think to get the point clear, right? Nobody thinks, I hope, on this Zoom, otherwise we have real trouble, that on a gray, rainy day like today, at least if you're on the East Coast, somebody unplugged the sun. Or like someone forgot to charge the sun, used up the battery, right? Or like the sun gave up today, like, it's what's today? Thursday. It's a Thursday. I was out yesterday. Forget about it, right? No, no, no. Why is it gray, team? All right, professor. How dumb is this? It's because the clouds are covering the sun, you see? But the brilliance of the sun is always present. And they didn't have actually, there's actually a fantastic astrological tradition here, but they didn't have like astronomical explanations of what happens at nighttime when the sun disappears. We don't want to get too lost. But even just during the day, we know the sun is always perfectly shining. It's just that the clouds cover it. You see? So it's not like you need to repower the sun. You just need to move the clouds, or more better strategy, allow the clouds to pass. So what are the clouds in this metaphor? The clouds are, in the earlier tradition, we would say the clouds are our ignorance, our habits of attaching ourselves to self. See the true self problem here? It's our very habit of desiring a true self that's uniquely me and independent. That's the cloud cover. We can't see that way. It's also the desire, the craving, by the way, including the craving for liberation. So if you want liberation, you can't see it because the desire is the clouds. And the hatred and the animosity and the divisions between the things you like and the dislike. These judgments, these habits, what we call our karma, our karmic habits of seeing the world, are what cover the clouds of liberation. They're what prevent liberation from shining through the whole time. Yikes. And on some level, and this is very common in some of the traditions, like the Zen tradition you've probably heard of, we'll come to in a couple of weeks, right? They talk about fundamentally the clouds are judgment. Subtle judgment, though. I don't mean like the nastiest Facebook posts that I'm sure none of you post, but maybe your friends or family post, right? Like really nasty judgmental stuff. I mean, like instinctively. Oh, like, oh, this Zoom's going well, or I'm a little bit nervous, I'm going too fast, judgment, right? Or like, I like how I look in this box on the screen, or I don't like how I look, or whatever it might be, right? Or like, I'm comfortable in my chair, yeah, I'm a little bit uncomfortable in my chair. You see, right? I mean, just really subtle judgments we're always making. Yeah. These are the cloud cover that prevent what? Our recognition of the natural brilliance of awareness. So there's a lot of ways of talking about this, but you have to admit, to give us a little bit of a kind of a taste, so nobody quits the Zoom yet, right? That you don't actually have to make any effort to have naturally brilliant, aware experience whoosh up every moment. Are you guys hearing sounds because you made a distinct effort before you signed on to listen? Don't need to. Or is everyone on the Zoom like crediting themselves for being capable of their proprioception, meaning like their capacity to be aware of their own selves, or your feeling of your body in the chair? Did you have to like give yourself a pep talk this morning? Today, I want to be able to feel my body. I want to smell sound. I want to smell smells, see sights, think thoughts. Don't need to. Because the natural, brilliant awareness, the awakened quality of existence is always there. Like, relax, it's there on transcendent days and on miserable days. Days when you have a migraine and days when you suddenly feel really clear. On days of tremendous joy and terrible pain and suffering. Awareness always present. And it's our desires, judgments, attachments to something like a self, even a true self, that prevents us from seeing it. But you don't have to make it. It can't be made. That's the argument. Now, in a way, we're simplifying because there's so many different debates about what you do to see it. But the fundamental challenge is getting out of the way. So we have a bit of an issue here. If, in fact, enlightenment is like the sun shining behind the cloud, or in the Japanese tradition, the perfect moon behind the clouds, and our efforts to clear the sky are just cloud cover itself, what do we do? It's not like we can just take a nap, sit around. That's what we all do. That's not true. I'm sure everyone here is very diligent, hardworking human beings. But you know what I mean. People sit around all the time, right? Watch TV. It doesn't mean you're enlightened. Or at least you don't experience a natural brilliance of awareness by just sitting around. But so too, the attachment, even to the path to liberation, to be the best monk or nun, to follow all the rules, to study all the texts, to write philosophical interpretations, which, trust me, many Buddhists did, to become master meditators, to go into retreat for months and years at a time into the edge of the forest or into a cave or otherwise, and focus on the breath, generate concentration, and so on and so forth. On some level, the attachment to those practices themselves are just more cloud cover. So we have a problem. How is there a path that isn't attachment to the path? How is there a skillful, here you see the Mahayana, set of teachings that invite people to drop their attachment to fixing things while simultaneously giving people the tools to see what's already there? It's the million-dollar question. So in the coming weeks, we will have a couple different answers. I'll present you at least two versions of answers from the Japanese tradition, the Zen tradition, and the Tibetan tradition. In fact, there's all sorts of negotiations about this. I mean, conservatively, there's 1,500 years of brilliant human development on this topic. The Buddhist tradition would say there's been aeons of it because there's been skillful teaching for aeons. But we'll try to develop some of these ideas. But to do so, we have to dig into this other problem, which is the emptiness problem, which is the radical critique of selfhood in the first place. Because otherwise, we're going to end up back at the true self. And by the way, if that's where you all end up as human beings, back at the true self, that doesn't seem so terrible to me. But it's just not the Buddhist solution. Is that clear? Right? For these Mahayana Buddhists, we can't be getting back to a true self. We're going to get in trouble. And by the way, there's a lot of argument about this within Buddhist communities. Accusations that folks who teach Buddha nature teachings are just themselves secretly trying to recreate an Atman or a self that we're attached to, which basically makes them non-Buddhist. All right. So it's not quite 8 o'clock, but we had a lot of material here, and I'm betting there are questions. So I'm going to take the risk and open up a few minutes early. If anyone would like to jump in, please feel free. You can just start talking or put questions into the chat or wave at me, whatever you like. But my sense is, I hope this week we have a bit of material or a little bit of worry to kind of wade our way through. Any thoughts here about the sun behind the cloud problem, or Buddha nature and self, or otherwise? Please, Sis Maria.
Yeah. I mean, uh, when I listen to you, I mean, one of the things I've learned about Stoics and Stoic philosophy is that they basically say the same thing. It's not the thing, it's the judgments about the thing, right? That impede you. And what they say is when you judge rightly about these things or have no judgment about them, but just realize that these things are, then you attain wisdom. And in their tradition, the most important thing was to become a wise person, right? So in the Buddhist tradition, if someone could learn to let the clouds move away and see, okay, and be enlightened, I guess what I want to know is enlightenment a feeling? Is enlightenment a peace? Is it, is it, what is enlightenment? It, an emotion, a way of thinking? What is it? You know, because for the Stoics, it means being wise, whatever that means, but who knows what that means. But what is enlightenment? If you can do that and recognize this, so not have the attachments on the path to the path, what is it that you experience? Is it what, you know, what the Greek philosophers said was true happiness or daimonia? What is it? That's what I want to know. Do you know?
So wonderful. I mean, of course I don't, but I appreciate the question. But a couple of things to say. Like the college professors can say, this is the million dollar question. I do a whole course on this, not because I have answers, but to acknowledge that this is a lasting problem in Buddhist traditions. You really do have different positions. But I'm not going to totally evade the question because a couple of things you say are, I think, both spot on for some Buddhists and a problem for others. So, for example, in very early traditions attributed to the Buddha, there is a literal definition that nirvana or liberation or awakening is peace. Now, what peace means is a question. But yeah, you could argue textually that that's exactly one of the most predominant ways of thinking about liberation is peace. That's non-negotiable, meaning it's the ending of suffering or the non-arising of suffering, right? But the problem is it's not a state of being because that assumes a constant being. Can't be that. So in some cases in the Mahayana tradition, you have a robust literature about all of the brilliant skillfulness and forms of embodiment that come with a long lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes long path to develop the skills so you can help free people from the attachments to the things that weren't there in the first place.
Mhm.
It's called the Mahayana path. And there are stages and paths. There are different enumerations of all the different steps. And so you get these really robust descriptions of like basically the teaching skills that Buddhists have, including the capacity to like walk through walls and see and hear everybody's talking and recognize everybody's recognize everybody's karma, all these skills that are helpful to be able to reach people where they are. So in that way, awakening is a whole robust set of what they call qualities. Those qualities are somehow inherent in this natural awakening. This Buddha nature in the gold are the qualities that allow people to be skillful teachers. And then there are much more radical interpretations that say all that business about the qualities is just skillful means. It's a way to get people excited about the path. But ultimately, it's not necessary. Any attachment to the idea of like being a superstar, being a Buddha, like the images you can see at the museum, right, are themselves mistake that cover over. And so we'll have like some very radical positions. I'll try to give you guys one in a couple of weeks from contemporary Zen communities that say, actually, awakening is just something totally normal.
Wow.
Literally, this is a quotation in English from a very famous American Japanese teacher. It's nothing special.
Wow.
So you really get wide ranges of interpretations. Now, one could argue that this is built into the Mahayana teaching. This is why I introduced last week of recognition of the necessity to be skillful. A third answer, by the way, which is related here to the skillfulness point, is a very commonly cited sutra or discourse attributed to the Buddha, where he says, look, obsessing about what enlightenment is itself is just going to cause you suffering. Maybe I told the story last semester. They say, like, this is like, can you imagine if you got shot by an arrow? You were out, hunting or something like that. You got shot by accident by an arrow, or maybe on purpose, right? And then a doctor comes, rushes over to you, right, to take out the arrow and heal your wound so you don't die. And you said, hey, wait, hold on just a second there, kind friend, right? Um, uh, Before you pull it out, I just have a couple questions for you, right? Can you tell me what brand of arrow this is? Can you tell me what kind of bow it was that shot the arrow that pierced me? Oh, I'd like to know the name of the person who shot me, but also their heritage and their social class. This is like basically a pretty literal paraphrase, right? They say, "Oh, these questions aren't going to help. What's important is pulling out the arrow. And that's what the teachings do. You see? And so it's this very obsession with the quality of what it even means to be Buddha that prevents us from just doing what we got to do. You see? So that's why it's like hopeless people. I mean, you see, like me and Sister Marie, we have our degrees, right? We're the hopeless ones here because every division is so fascinating to us and is evidence of, the history of human curiosity and discursive skill and this, right? I mean, all the stuff that we love, I assume. I don't mean to project, but that's probably true, right? Like it's us, we get in our own way, right? Of just joining the monastery or learning to meditate or whatever. It's never that simple, by the way. But anyway, you do have these teachings. I'm not making up this teaching. And so to say somehow the very kind of human habit of discursive fascination with the product keeps us from seeing it. This is this very same famous image that comes up in Chinese and Japanese Zen tradition. We'll introduce what that means, right? Of the difference of, right, pointing at the moon and seeing the moon. Because what happens when you point at the moon, you're just kind of looking at your finger.
Uh, Josh, we have some comments and questions in the
Please.
chat box. Want to take them
Thanks
up?
so much. Yeah, Marilee. So this question about the stronger path, nourishment or discovery, I'm not sure how to define or respond to what you mean by stronger, but I will definitely say that there are real debates in Buddhist communities. So for example, the tradition I know the best I mentioned is Tibetan tradition, and you have both models, kind of a discovery heavy model and a nourishment heavy model, and they both kind of coexist in any path, but different traditions emphasize different pieces. And by the way, this isn't just like everyone's happy, do your own thing, right? I mean, like there's real polemical attacks from one tradition to the other about who's best, right?
Wow.
So there's real disagreement. And in all of these East Asian traditions, there are many different schools of Buddhism that at different times have had real arguments with each other, call each other names, all the good stuff, human beings, right? Maybe for good reason, maybe for bad. I don't know. I'm not trying to judge myself, but people really do disagree. I'm not just saying that because I'm a college professor. It really is true. Yeah. I think the idea of this Patricia's claim about it being impossible and hopeless is actually the opposite of the skillfulness of Buddha nature teachings, admittedly not presented in this kind of semi-academic format on Zoom that way. But the very idea is like actually all of our mistakes, negative habits, judgments, problems, never for one moment tarnish the natural brilliance of the gold that's hiding beneath. This is one of the primary affirmations, actually, really in each model, because the idea is there's always this seed. We all have it. We can't ruin the seed because it's our natural capacity for awareness. We can't ruin it, even if it needs to be nourished. And we can't stain or harm or like dissolve in acid or something the gold to kind of torture the metaphor here. The point is, it's already perfect, right? And so people don't like this. I always joke in class, right? It's not really funny. By the way, it's really not funny. But I always joke in class, like Buddha nature, it applies to Hitler and Mother Teresa,
Mm.
which, by the way, is not an equation of Hitler and Mother Teresa, right? We'll have to worry about this next week. There is still a place for moral activity, right? And skillfulness. And even Hitler can't ruin the natural awakened quality. I mean, if you think about it, right? Hitler woke up every day, had sensory experience, had the capacity for thinking. I mean, whatever we all may have different interpretations of evil in this group, but nobody's making up an apology, right, for a figure like that. But like he was obviously had some intelligence enough to write a book, right? Without before you kick me off the Zoom, right? I mean, the point is like there's a certain natural capacity for discursiveness, yeah, and thought and language and oratory, whatever. I don't want to get lost, but the point here is that like this quality of awareness is still present even in the most outrageous examples. That's the position, whether we like it or not, which means
Wow.
we couldn't possibly ruin it. We couldn't possibly ruin it. So that's a long way of saying, actually, from one perspective, it's really quite hopeful, right? To kind of offend us all again. Like you can't, as we say, F it up. You can't. It's impossible to. And that doesn't deny the fact that this whole project is framed within the path to liberate all beings from suffering. Is that clear? So it's not supposed to be some kind of form of quietism where if we just ignore reality, everything's going to work out right. That's really not the intention here. So again, probably poorly delivered by me, but the idea is that Buddha nature is actually potentially quite hopeful. So I really like this idea about creating the image of God. Without getting into like Buddhist theology here, there is a lot of Buddhist critique about crediting a divine being as the source of our, let's say, Buddha nature. And there's all sorts of technical arguments about why. It's not to say that there aren't powerful beings in there, and a lot of people treat Buddhas and awakened beings functionally like godheads in a certain sense. So
Hmm.
anyone who tells you that Buddhists don't have gods don't know what they're talking about, frankly. I mean, there are presentations, you can make presentations, and some Buddhists do without any reference to the divine. But in real Buddhist communities, there's tons of divine beings and powerful beings. In any event, but the problem is that the idea that there is some kind of separate source is just an acknowledgement of dependence, which prevents the very capacity for one to wake up to an everlasting awareness that's already present in the first place. Like this dependence is just an issue. And frankly, without getting lost in theology, I should just mention it here because there are theologians here, and I'm sure the acknowledgement that there is a divine being who's capable of acting in the world, hearing our problems, changing things, participating in history is just an acknowledgement that God is changing and dependent like all the rest of us. And that's not going to fly for these Buddhists, right? If God's participating in cause and effect, God might be a lot more powerful than us, but God is equally dependent, changing, and therefore, in some level, suffering, which I recognize probably sounds like heresy or something, which is fine. But the point is that there is a lot of this kind of argumentation, especially in Indian Buddhism, against God as the source and guarantor of something like Buddha nature. Is that clear? So again, right or wrong, I don't know. But there is kind of a resistance, let's say, to Linda's point here about Buddha nature as somehow that thing which is given by God.
Mm.
Which, whatever, you don't need my opinion, but that is also, of course, a very beautiful idea, right? And maybe true, I don't know. But it's just not their position. Does that make sense? Yeah. But thank you, everyone.
Sh- She's uh, further commented, Joshua.
Mhm. Yeah,
No,
great. Well, I'd love to hear more, Linda, if you want to speak out here or text or add to the
Linda, do
chain
you
or
wanna?
email. We can
Yeah.
certainly take this up now or and as well in later weeks because I know there's a lot to talk about here. Please.
No, I was just saying, trying to say that
Hmm.
was in reaction to your example of Hitler
Hmm.
and how that gold is there whether he was Hitler or not, so to speak.
Yeah, wonderful.
And I
Yeah.
was saying, comparatively, I was thinking we say we're made in the image and likeness of God, and that never goes away, no matter how we reflect ourselves in the world and what we do.
Hmm.
So that's where I was commenting from. Not that necessarily. I wasn't really talking about Buddhahood in that
Hmm.
sense.
No, it's beautiful. Thank you so much, Linda. But
Yeah.
it is a question, and again, this is a question for me. I grew up in a Jewish tradition, so the idea of, human beings in the image of God is like prevalent.
Mhm.
But it's not as if I've studied this professionally at all. But I am kind of
Right.
curious, like when you all hear that idea, if it sounds like we are in the image of God because God is the source of who we really are.
I I didn't connect what Linda just pointed out, but I mean, I guess this idea of the seed or the gold and everything, you're talking about essences, right? something essential. So I guess in Catholicism, that essence uh, of essential goodness comes from that notion that we are made in the image of God. So I guess the question that I would have is, okay, if it doesn't emanate, if this essence, this gold, the seed, doesn't emanate from outside of myself, where does it come from? Where does it come from? I mean, that is what we say in
Hmm.
Catholicism, and I think in Judaism as well,
Hmm.
that our essence, and when you move to, Christianity in particular, you talk about grace, this other thing that happens to you. I was thinking about grace a lot when you were talking. It's something, uh, I think it works with, you know, nourishment and discovery. You have this grace given to you, and you either build on it, and we do things, grace builds on nature. So you do good actions, you do good activities, and you come this, at, at the Protestant Reformation. um, I think one of the things that they kind of held against Catholics was this idea that we could nourish and create conditions, and we should just sit back and discover, right? That
Hmm.
all you need is faith. But going back to the point, because there's so many things going through my head. I'm sorry. It's like, where does in Buddhism, how do they explain the origin of these essences, of this essence of the Buddha nature?
There isn't one.
Huh?
There isn't one. There
Then how
can't
do
be.
they know it exists if they can't posit and
Well,
originate
Sister
and
Maria,
create
like it's obvious it exists in that every moment of us is pervaded
by?
by an awareness that we don't control at all.
Mhm.
It's undeniable. So take a step back. Like the position I'm about to describe is not undeniable, but the experience of it is undeniable. So actually, and this is a little bit of a preview, and it's going to be a challenge. I'm not sure if I personally am the person to pull it off, but one of the challenges is going to be to describe something like a Buddha nature that can't be created. That's the position that they want. It can't be created. It's eternal in that sense. One of the reasons it can't become from God. There can't be a moment of creation.
Oh.
And it can't be an essence. So I think all of your beautiful descriptions of the essence-like quality probably hold well, and this is one of the topics of debate. But we're going to see the whole next discussion next week is about criticisms of the very possibility about anything being essential. So how on earth could you have something like this ever present, perfect, pure, sun-like awareness that isn't the essence of something? Uh, we're going to have some trouble, but there are all sorts of interesting Buddhist solutions to this problem. So that's not meant to be an explanation because it really isn't one, but it's an acknowledgement of like the kind of an appreciation on my part of the points you guys are bringing up, but also kind of an acknowledgement that we have some trouble we got to move through here to make sense of some of these Buddhist claims. But to
Mhm.
kind of get back to speaking English here, right? The argument's going to be, yeah, Buddha nature is not actually an essence at all, and it was definitely not created. If it was created, it can be destroyed, or it can fall apart, or it can end.
But I don't understand. Sorry to um,
Yeah,
pursue this,
please.
but I don't understand how it is not in essence when you say that whether you are Hitler or Mother Teresa, this inheres in.
Well, the reason is it doesn't define anything
Oh, okay, all right.
because it's the qualities that make Mother Teresa or Hitler are always changing. Their bodies, their thoughts, their experiences, their words, their actions. And especially in the world of rebirth and karma, none of those things stay constant. So that which is like reliable in a sense, this untarnished, pure awareness that's like the sun in the sky itself is not a person or a being. Those are all these kind of conceptual ideas that we have. that themselves are dependent on changing conditions. It's really
Okay,
stubborn. I'm telling you, this stuff is so stubborn. We're going to get to it next week. I'm going to drive everyone. We do my best to drive everyone crazy next week. So I apologize that I know I'm not doing a good job answering your question,
that's
but
okay.
I think you're asking the questions I would like to be asked. It's perfect. Really, truly, I'm not just saying that. And again, I keep on saying that we're going to have like some intellectual trouble to work through this stuff. It's
Mhm.
quite brilliant, right, wrong, or otherwise. I don't know, but there's some really quite brilliant solutions to this very issue. Stay tuned. Yikes.
Wonderful.
But thank you guys
Anybody
all
else?
for listening. Please, yeah, if anyone else.
Linda, Carol, anybody else? I can't see you all, but anybody else like to you don't even need a question, comment, anything at all you'd like to say, ask, do? Well, it's certainly, I mean, somebody said something to me recently about this course. I said, well, I don't know. It's like big mental gymnastics for me every Thursday night because it's so far out of my realm of understanding. Christine Keller just wrote, "My brain is full." Thank you. I think so. I think it's just so different from anything that, especially I think I was born and raised a Catholic, so different. So I appreciate having my mind open every Thursday night. Sorry, I was a little late. I was stuck in traffic, but
Mhm.
thank you, Joshua, and everyone tonight. Before we go away, we live in a world where incredible violence is being perpetrated,
Yeah.
uh,
Mhm.
and many people are dying. For what I think many of us ask, why and what is the reason? But the senselessness of it, I think, is something that we all feel. And it makes us nervous about the world we live in and the people who rule this world right now and govern us. So maybe we could just spend a minute praying to whatever it is we pray to or not, um, to ask that the people who are guiding our nations be enlightened, be be brought to some kind of enlightenment that helps them to understand the dignity of all human beings. And that, as Pope Francis always says, war is always failure. So keep in mind all the people who are suffering tonight, all the people under the bombs, all of the children who are frightened to death by what is happening around them, and all those who have died. May they rest in peace and have some 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 sense that the world is not insane and that we can move in a different direction. So everyone, good night, good night, and see you next Thursday night for another mind stretching experience. It's wonderful.
Good.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks for all your
Thank you.
donations. All of you have donated. I really appreciate it. Spirit Alive appreciates it. Joshua, another great night. Thank you. And I hope you get around the filth on Fulton Street.
Thank you very much.
All right, take it
All
easy.
right. Thank you.